Thank you very much, everybody. And I think I was telling Steve and Jarl before, I think that the topic we're talking about today, cloud gaming, is going forward going to be one of the most important things we talk about in the intersection of gaming and technology. We're just starting to get our feet wet now, even though we've been talking about it for 8 or 9 years at least. But I think if you come back here in 2 or 3 years, every panel is going to touch on it in some way. So as mentioned, I'm Dan Ackerman. I'm a editor and reporter for CNET, where I've been covering games and tech for the past 15 years or so. And here with me is Steve Cottam from Antstream Games and Jarl Ostensen. Am I close?
Enough. Close enough.
Okay, please.
Close enough.
From Polystream, and you guys both work in very different parts of the cloud ecosystem. So let's just start off briefly by telling me a little bit about what you guys do and how you guys touch on this cloud gaming concept. Steve?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Steve, the founder and CEO of a company called Antstream. And what we wanted to do was take all the retro games from the 70s, 80s and 90s, and make them accessible to everybody on any device. And we took a decision that streaming was the way to achieve that. So that's what we've done. We built a cloud gaming subscription streaming service focused on retro games, which actually came out on early access last night.
Cool. And Jarl?
And I'm Jarl. I'm Director of Engineering at Polystream. We have a technology, a platform base that allows you to actually stream games. And our technology, we've been working on this for the last couple of years. Our technology is quite different from the technologies out there at the moment. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that right at the moment, but it's a streaming technology that is available for games across all sorts of data centers and locations in the world without any particular needs for special hardware. So that's kind of where we come into this.
And of course, all the big players are really getting into this deeply right now. We're going to see a lot more about Stadia from Google over the next, I think, couple of weeks even. And same thing for Microsoft with their xCloud. Sony has been teasing what's going to happen with game streaming on their next generation console, although they're skipping E3, the big video game trade show this year. So we may have to wait a little bit longer. Out of these big guys getting into the space right now, who do you guys think has the best grasp of the promise and limitations of the concept of cloud streaming?
It's interesting. I actually think what we're going to do is we're going to see a fairly even footing from all of them. I think Microsoft and Sony have got huge pedigree in gaming. Google are obviously new to that, but obviously Google also have incredible infrastructure. They have things like YouTube that they can leverage to bring gamers into their games. So I think what we're going to be looking at is a very kind of even spread system. It'll take a while to balance out, but ultimately it's going to give consumers choice over which providers they want to use.
I agree with that. I also think that where they're going to excel is in basically how long you'll have to wait before you can play a game. In other words, how well they can scale and how capable they are of scaling and reach for a large population on this planet. That will be the distinguishing factor, I think, definitely.
And that's why Google had their Assassin's Creed test, I think last year at some point, that everyone thought worked surprisingly well. Clearly their attempt to see how well they could scale that, especially with the AAA, modern, just came out game, which presents a whole different set of challenges than streaming classic games, retro games, or even older console games. That's what Sony did with PlayStation Now, which has been around a long time now. You don't really hear about it much, but I guess it's technically the biggest cloud platform. Absolutely. Just because that, just like the PlayStation VR is the biggest VR platform, just because there are so many PlayStations out there. Where do you think that these companies need to shift gears to go from streaming things like old PlayStation 3 games to more modern game experiences? Will they be able to keep up with the next generation of consoles that are just about to come out?
Do you know, I think, really, if you think about what they're doing, all they're really doing is they're distributing consoles, but they're distributing them into a data center. So you still have, with normal consoles, you've still got to get those out to your distribution points. You've got to ship them out to the stores. You've got to get them into people's homes. All they're really doing is just doing the same thing, but into data centers near to where the users are. So to some degree, they're doing the same thing, but it's just slightly different tech, and they're able to centralize it.
I mean, the big pushback has always been broadband penetration and people saying, oh, this will never happen because, I don't have fast enough broadband in my home, or someone else out somewhere in the woods somewhere does not have broadband. And I remember the same thing being said about things like Netflix and Amazon Prime, where people said, oh, they're making original shows. That's insane. No one's ever been able to stream all these shows. But come back several years later and no one's going, oh, how come there's not a Blu-ray version of Daredevil or whatever? people have gotten used to that. Is the broadband issue still the biggest issue that companies are going to face in terms of pushback on cloud gaming as a business model?
I think broadband will still be an issue for some for a while. It depends on where you are in the world, right? So that comes back again to the ability for these providers to scale and to actually reach you where you are. Broadband is only an issue if you have to be very far away from where you're actually serving the stream from. Of course, if you have a very poor broadband connection, then that is an issue, but it is getting better. We know that's getting better in terms of both in Europe and in North America, but also in the rest of the world. But being close to where the actual game is being hosted is going to be incredibly important, and that's where the technology and where the challenge for the big streamers, if you like, is going to be, and how quickly and how scalably can they get their hardware needs out to be close to you, and that's going to be the big thing. Broadband, absolutely important. Proximity, even more so.
Isn't that just a sort of expanded version of the issue you have with just current online multiplayer games, whether it's Fortnite or anywhere else, where you have a different game experience depending on which servers you're going through? And it's funny, that makes me think about the one big player in this space, I don't even know if they're a big player, that no one really talks about, but they've put so much tech and attention into it, and that's Nvidia with GeForce Now, which most people probably haven't even heard of. But they let you stream, current gen and older PC games to pretty much any device. I've used it through an Nvidia Shield hooked up to a TV, making me perhaps the only person who's ever hooked up an Nvidia Shield to a TV and used it for anything. And I even used it here in London on hotel Wi-Fi, just to kind of get my feet wet again this week and see what the current state of it was, because I hadn't played with it in a while. And I played a very reasonably satisfying session of Rage 2 from a hotel on hotel Wi-Fi through GeForce Now, and I was like, you know what? That's a lot better than I expected, considering I'm not on my own home, rock stable connection. To be fair, the next day I tried it again and got nowhere. But the one time it did, but that's one thing with cloud streaming. Some days you'll get a great experience, and other days not. But that shows you how far it's come. I think that I was able to do that in a hotel. Why don't we hear more about what Nvidia is doing, especially as they're pushing high-end PC games, which is such a growth part of the industry? Are they going to remain a player, or are they going to just power somebody else's system at the end of the day?
Yes, it's a really interesting question. I mean, the GeForce Now, I agree with you. I think it's a fantastic system. In fact, I use it myself at home all the time. Obviously, Nvidia make the chips. They have the grid chips. So it made sense for them to do something in this space. I don't know enough about Nvidia's infrastructure, but I would imagine it's nowhere near the size of Amazon or Google or Microsoft. So those guys definitely have the advantage when it comes to scaling out. But Nvidia have the advantage when they're building the chips. So it'd be interesting to see if they end up doing some kind of partnership like Sony have just done with Microsoft to bring their chips to more people using Azure or Google or AWS perhaps.
Another thing you have to keep in mind with Nvidia is they are largely an HPC provider, high-performance compute provider. So a lot of their focus on using their GPU power is actually on machine learning and inference, which is an interesting one also when you look at how this pans out with gaming. There's a sense of competition between where do I put my compute? Do I put it over here where I can do machine learning, or do I put it over here where I can stream some graphics? Very much the same technology is based in both cases, and Nvidia is very much bang in the middle of that. I think we'll see more of Nvidia, definitely, but their main focus of growth is going to be probably outside of games for a while. That is my judgment based on what we can see, what we can read, what we can hear, but they absolutely have the horsepower to do it.
Yeah, I mean, especially now that I think the next generation consoles are both going to be AMD based rather than Nvidia based, and they're probably more interested in self-driving cars than anything else right now. But it's interesting because it does keep the PC side of it into it when you think of a lot of these as being very console-based concepts. And the problem with consoles has always been once you get the hardware, it's immediately out of date the moment it hits the stores, and then you're looking at your Xbox One or your PlayStation 4, it's already completely ancient in any hardware terms. So a cloud-based system would keep you from having that problem because the hardware can be updated on the back end whenever. You have a little Roku-style box. 5 or 6 years ago, I wrote that. I said, this is Xbox One, PS4, going to be the last generation of true hardware consoles. Your next one is just going to be a little Roku-style box that you're going to stream to. I was completely wrong, but maybe I was just one generation ahead of time. Is this the end of physical media for games, this next generation that we're going to see next Christmas, probably? And are things you guys do, cloud things, is that going to be what kills it?
This is the burning question. I think the two will coexist for quite some time. I often use the audio analogy with this, in that for me and for 99% of the population, Spotify is absolutely perfect, and I get a fantastic experience. For some people, they just want a piece of vinyl, they want to drop the needle and hear the pop. And I think there's always going to be somebody who will invest time and the money into expensive hardware. But for the broad spectrum of gamers, I think actually cloud gaming is going to be where people will shift to.
I think I agree completely, but I also think that, to your point about the ability to easily replace the old hardware on the back end, there is quite a lot of work around that, and there's quite a tricky and costly thing to do. So I think we're still, to your point, there's still going to be a coexisting period for a long time, because figuring out the logistics of taking out your bespoke hardware and replacing it in thousands of data centers is still a pretty big deal. It's not something that's going to quickly be fixed and solved. So I think we'll stay with the combination of the two for a while. This is also an interesting result, I think, of, you know, when we started out many years ago, we wrote all our games were running on a single CPU, right? We did everything on CPU. We did a game, we did physics, we did rendering, the whole thing was on the CPU. And then we started, now we have no problems with running some of it on the CPU and some of it on a completely different architecture, the GPU. And we're kind of moving into those domains and understanding more and more how we do heterogeneous compute. I think that the challenges there with the cloud-based solutions as well, they need to be explored, need to be understood. So being able still to use as much universal compute as possible, the standard CPUs, is still going to be quite a great benefit, because the cost of taking out and exchanging these cards and this piece of hardware is still going to be a high cost for it.
I mean, that's a scalability issue.
Yeah.
When you think about it, I could be wrong, don't quote me on this, as I say to everybody, but I think GeForce now, for example, I think they dedicate like a 1080 card per player somewhere in a rack, and that's great for a small thing that enthusiasts are going to use, but it certainly doesn't scale well, and you'll have to find a way to get it up to a quality level that people will like on their 65-inch, 4K OLED TVs, at a certain resolution, a certain quality level, but also scalable and can actually maintain the throughput, so you're not going super clear 1 second, super janky the next. Obviously, that's an issue that is a lot easier with classic games, like Steve works on. I want to read you a quick quote from our pal Jack Trenton yesterday downstairs when asked about cloud gaming. And obviously, he was big at Sony for many, many years leading into their PlayStation Now platform, and now he does indie game investments. He said, the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to is understanding the business model for cloud gaming. Any kind of catalog subscription download is great for games that have run their life cycle. So how does cloud streaming as part of a subscription package work for new games? Now, you in particular deal with classic games. Is it easy to figure out, is it easy to talk people into licensing classic games for cloud versus one-off, mobile operating system downloads or browser-based or used to be social versions?
I certainly won't say it's easy. It's taken us 4 years to license. I think we've licensed 2,000 games now, and that's taken us about 4 years. And there's a big educational piece in there. I think a lot of people, particularly before the announcement of Stadia, were very nervous about it. There was still the skepticism as to whether it was going to happen. Since Microsoft's announcement, since Google, now everybody's saying, okay, this is coming. We understand it's coming, and how do we adapt to that, and how can we license our games to fit into that environment? For us, in particular, we are a subscription all-you-can-eat service. But I think that's a lot easier for us to do with back catalogue content than if we were, streaming the latest, greatest AAA title, just purely because of the economics of delivering that content.
And you have a lower bandwidth threshold, I assume, than some other cloud-type servers would have.
Certainly, and the bandwidth's one element, but actually it's the compute and the GPU where all the money is burned in the back end, which is obviously a lot easier with the simpler titles.
As a city dweller in New York, I'm always concerned about things like this when I go into the subway where there is no service, and I'm using something that's connected and it doesn't cache basically enough of it, and then I'm cut off. How do we deal with that issue? Can you, for example, temporarily download some games and play them on the train? And I'll tell you where I ran into this in a second.
Yeah, no, we get asked this a lot. No, we don't, and we deliberately don't do that actually because you run into all kinds of different compatibility issues and things when you're trying to support so many different devices. We are working on the basis that the network problems will get solved. So when you're in the tube, I don't know whether it's going to be maybe 2 years, but you will have 5G in the tube. That problem will go away. It's hard to picture that right now, but there will become a time where we'll just take that for granted and we'll expect 100 megabit wherever we are.
Yeah. I mean, that's even with games that you download onto your phone, they still require an always-on connection, even on mobile games. I was very excited to play Elder Scrolls Blades in the subway in New York, and every time I get on a train, it goes, "Oh, I can't connect." But I've downloaded the game. Why do I need to connect? Very frustrating. The other. Oh, you know what? We should go back to we've all worked in this area for a long time. We remember the not original, but the original of the current generation of players, OnLive and Gaikai. I remember when OnLive launched, and that's got to be 2010 maybe.
Yeah.
And we all thought at CNET, we all thought it was snake oil. We're like, they can't possibly do this. And that was a startup where you could basically buy games, you're really just leasing them, just like you would on Steam, but instead of downloading the game and playing it locally, you play it through their game app, and it was cloud streaming. And they had whatever the current games of 2010 were, and a few classic titles. And we were convinced it would never work, and then we went to E3 and we saw it, and we tried it, we were like, well, this actually does kind of work. And eventually it worked sort of when the stars were aligned just right, but man, it was a real head turner back then, and Gaikai was the other version that never really commercialized itself, but later got bought by Sony and turned into PlayStation Now. Have those been a big influence on you guys, or what did you guys think of those platforms when they were like the next big thing for about 6 to 18 months?
Well, our CEO came from OnLive,
Okay. All right.
So he learned how not to do it.
Yes.
And that was
There were a lot of issues
That was
there.
a valuable lesson. But actually, the lesson there was, as our CTO likes to say, was paying someone else's electricity bill, and it's still going to remain an issue when you need to run on especially on power-hungry GPUs. But yeah, we took a lot of learnings from that.
That was an interesting company, and I wish they had zigged a few times when they zagged, because we really had a lot of fun covering those early days of that. Did you try some of those early services? What was your experience?
I did. I subscribed to OnLive, actually. I was very impressed with it. I mean, the latency or the lag issue was more noticeable with OnLive, given the way the tech that they had at the time. I think they were just, like a lot of companies, a little bit ahead of their time. If they'd released now, it would have been a blow-away success. I actually thought it was a really good service.
Oh, 100%, yes. It was definitely ahead of its time. And every time it worked, you were very excited. And every time it didn't work, you're like, oh, really? What was I buying into? I don't quite get that. You mentioned latency, and I'm going to read you another quote here. This is going to be a mystery quote, though, and then we can talk about it a little bit, because it really does connect right into this. Okay, here's our mystery quote from somebody who you no doubt know. When you talk about having a 50 millisecond ping, that does not invalidate the process. This is talking about the possibilities of cloud gaming. If you take a look at what a lot of console games do out there, you're playing with your wireless controller, it's going through post-processing on your TV, the games themselves often have multiple frames of latency. You get an event, pipeline animation, render thread. A lot of games have over 100 milliseconds of latency in them right now. Now, it's true that adding latency is always bad, but the laws of physics do not guarantee it's a bad idea. So who is that talking about cloud gaming? That's our first quiz. I love that this is the kind of panel where we can talk about things like post-processing and latency. This might be the most fun, geeky panel here. I will tell you, that ding, 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 that is correct. Now, number 2, when is that from?
That I couldn't say. But
that is from
further back than I might think.
It is from a conversation that I had with him and reported on back in 2011.
Oh, there you go.
And there you go. That is almost basically exactly what we're talking about now. He was so far ahead of the curve in seeing that these problems would be overcome, or that we'd come to accept a certain amount of latency. He went on to say, and this was very prescient, he said, I don't necessarily think any of the current players, and back then it was OnLive and Gaikai and a few others, will live to see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But I'd say it's almost a foregone conclusion that 5 or 10 years from now, and look, here we are, it's going to be a significant marketplace. Yeah. I think we're not there yet. When do you think it will become a significant marketplace? We are, let's see, 2011. We're about 8 years now since that quote.
You start.
So I was thinking about this a lot this morning. I think you need to start thinking about it now. I think it's going to roll in over the next 3 years, would be my guess, and it's going to happen very much in timing with 5G. So if you think about anybody who's working on a AAA game or starting a AAA game now, by the time that game's released, Google, xCloud, they're going to be very viable platforms, and you should really start thinking about preparing to go on them. I think middleware actually with Unreal and Unity will make that job a lot easier. It's just like targeting another platform in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I think it might even be a bit sooner than that, depending on which technology you go with, of course. But I think that now is a good time to start, and it's going to be quick. Once it starts accelerating, which it is doing, I mean, something like Google's announcement, for example, which we talked about a little bit earlier as well, you know, where it suddenly takes you from people talking about streaming as a bit of a sort of, oh, I don't really believe in that, to suddenly going, okay, clearly there are some big players in this, and that accelerates as well. Just to have that on board is good. So, yeah.
And that's what happened with, you know, Netflix and Hulu and all these other streaming services where people said, no, I want to download my movies. I'm not going to sit there and wait for a movie to buffer and stutter halfway through. That doesn't really happen, even when you're doing a 4K stream now over, you know, even cheap home broadband. So we're definitely, anything you can imagine will happen in this space. Who do you think, since we're running out of time, who do you think are the forces that are pushing back against us that would not like to see this happen? Do you think that Sony and Microsoft want to be in the hardware plastic box business, or are they eager to get out of that? Just like we all know they are eager to get out of the pressing discs and putting them on trucks and taking them to stores business.
Very good question. I don't think it'd be them pushing. I think for them it makes a lot of sense, particularly for Microsoft. You know, with what they're doing with their Azure cloud is very much a core part of their business. So anything they can push into the cloud makes a lot of sense. It'd be interesting to see how Nintendo. I mean, I know Nintendo have announced some kind of partnership with Microsoft. What I think will be the key thing is how are they going to differentiate themselves? If everything's just a cloud streaming service and I can get Sony, Microsoft, Google on my smart TV, what's the difference? You know, at the moment it's very much a hardware play, and what can the hardware deliver differently? So that will come down to the services they integrate with and the experience they offer you as a user.
I mean, the real promise for users is that cross-compatibility, the fact that if you have an Xbox and a PlayStation and discs from one will play in one and not the other, would sound insane to somebody if you were describing it as you could buy a Blu-ray and play it in your Sony Blu-ray player but not your LG Blu-ray player, or anything like that, or an MP3 that will play on this brand of phone and not that brand, which they, of course, had, but quickly got out of that business. The fact that we could have all of these devices disappear into our TVs, our phones, our tablets, making them basically invisible, I think is the ultimate win for consumers, and maybe you guys are going to help us get there.
I think, just to follow up on that for a moment, I think that all of those things will happen. I think where there will be pushback will be on cost. And that cost will be in how you deploy things to the cloud, and that's why picking a technology that allows you to do that at lower cost is going to be incredibly important.
If we had another hour, we would sit here and talk about who's going to pay for broadband in the future, as the providers have been pushing to get that cost passed on to either content providers or consumers, one way or the other, as long as someone else is paying for it. The era of unlimited internet, and they're always trying to play us out of that. And this will be one of the next great fights. So we have a couple seconds left. If anybody would like to ask some questions to these guys about cloud gaming, and we could have a microphone, or you could just shout. We could probably hear you. It's a small room. Any cloud gaming questions? Oh, here we go.
Oh, should stay down the front. So I was thinking, Google kind of teased, say they're gonna add some cool new features that could like definitely change like the game design of video games in the future. So what do you think about them?
I think that it's kind of a cool thing that they made that announcement, and it's going to be a long time still, I think, a lot of thinking before people kind of wrap their head around it. But we are in that era now. If you think about some other technologies that have got something in the cloud, it's not a trivial thing to wrap your head around, right? But I think it's absolutely something that we are going to see some game developer out there is going to pick up on that and create something really cool that takes advantage of that. And it's going to happen suddenly, and then suddenly everyone's going to try and do it. Like lens flares back when they were first came with D3D3, if anyone remembers that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it will happen quickly, and somebody small and innovative will come up with it, because everyone else will be focused on taking their same big games and putting it on every platform out there, because that's the easiest thing to do to make money, which is put your product on, you know, the widest range of devices possible. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, y'all. This has been fantastic, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the week here. Thank you.
Thank you.